So now that we have our list of posts, let's go ahead and try to implement a detail view for each of these posts. A detail view is one that will allow us to basically have to view the details of each post. Just like you see here, all we have is basically a link that leads us to the exact detail page of that post, but we don't have it implemented yet. So to do that, we have to first set up a URL in which we are going to be able to redirect to the detail page. But of course, we are following a test-driven approach. So what you have to do is to basically write the tests to help us do that, and then write the detail page as we need it. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So I'm going to head over to test.py within our code right here. So I'm going to go ahead and basically create a test case for our detail page. So I'm just going to come right here, and all I have to do is to create a class, and I'm going to call this class detail page. So let me just call it a detail page test case or detail page test. So after doing this, this is of course going to inherit from test case, and once we've inherited from test case, then we're going to go ahead and try to write the different tests. So these are going to be the action methods on this specific class. So the first one is going to be testing whether the detail page URL is going to return a correct response. So before we actually get started, let's try to create a sample post for which we're going to use to go and basically view the detail for that specific post. So I'll begin by saying self dot, in this case we're going to say self dot post, and that is going to be equal to post dot objects, and then in this case we shall say dot create. And once we've done that, then we are going to specify some attributes of a post that we want to create. So let's say the title, and the title in this case is going to be let's say learn JavaScript in this 23-hour course. So once we have that, then we can also go ahead and specify the body of this specific post. So to do that, we shall say body is going to be equal to, then we shall have to basically put in some blah 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 text. So I may just copy something, or let's say this is a beginner course on JS. So once we've done this, then we have been able to basically create some posts with that we're going to work with. So after creating that, then let's create our first test, which is going to be a method. I actually wrote this in capital letters, forgive me for that. So I'm going to do this by saying def. So we begin by test, and then we basically specify what we want to test. Now in this case, we want to test if we actually have that page existing, or if it actually returns the right response. So to do this, what we are going to do is to basically check for the template that's being rendered by this specific URL, and the actual URL to check whether it actually exists in our post. So to do that, we can just maybe call this test detail page. Detail page returns correct response. So in this case, we're going to say test detail page returns correct response. And once we have this, then we can say that this is going to take in self. And then the first thing we shall have to do is to create a response object. The reason that's why we created this response object is that it's one that allows us to basically make the request to this specific URL, and then return responses, and allow us to actually check some attributes within the response. So the first thing we're going to do is to just come right here and say that we're going to have our response object, and this is going to be actually an object of type HTTP response. So we shall access the client that's given to us by Django's test case class, and then we shall basically specify the URL that we want to actually make for this post. Now let's say each of our post details are going to be located on /post and then /id, or the ID or the unique identifier for each of the posts, which is basically the primary key. So I'll basically come right here, and all I have to do is to say that this is going to exist on /. Let's make it /post, and then we can maybe specify the ID of the post. So in this case, I'll just maybe use an F string and say F, and then we shall basically place in the ID of the specific post that you want to access. So we can come and say self.id. Once we've done this, now we can be able to check for the various things that show if our response is actually a right response. So let's first check for a response that's going to be returned, or if this page exists, then we shall get an OK status code. So let's say if we try to access this page, then we try to get the right status code. So we're going to come here and first of all assert for the status code that's returned. So we shall say self.assert equal, and then it's actually going to be assert equal, and then in this case we shall provide the first status code. So in this case it's the one that we're going to get from our response object. We're going to say response.status code, and then in here we're going to use our HTTP status class by saying HTTP status dot okay. Alright, so what this actually means is once you make a request to this specific URL, then you're trying to check if this actually returns the status code of 200. So let's go ahead and also check if it's going to return the right page or render the right page. So to that we shall just come right here and say self. It's actually going to be self dot, and in this case we shall going to say we're going to actually assert for that template that's used to make this response. So I'll just come right here and say self.assert, and then we say assert template used. So we can actually say template used and template not used. It actually just depends on what you want. So in this case we're going to use the template used, and then the template that you want to use is going to depend on the response. So we have to provide the response object. So this is going to be the one that we've been able to create right here. Once we've done that, then the next thing is actually going to be to basically provide the name of the template that we want to provide. Now in this case, we expect that this is going to be placed within our post directory that we created in the previous videos. If you haven't checked them out, please go ahead and check them out so that you can come here and really enjoy this series. So we're going to be placing this in our blog, and this is going to be, it's actually not blog, it's actually post/detail.html. So I'm just going to come here and say post/detail.html. And once we've done this, then I'm going to go ahead and save. So let's go ahead and try to make this test fail. Then we write code that's going to allow us to basically make this test pass. So I'm going to pull up the terminal right here. So we are having our server that's running. I'm going to go ahead and create a simple bash terminal right here. And once this terminal is open, we are in our virtual environment. So I'm going to run python manual.py and then test. So this will go ahead and test our code to basically show us that this is actually failing. So the reason that's why I have an error here is because I did a mistake. Apologies for that. So what I actually did is to basically create this self post object outside. It's not actually within any method, so Python is actually trying to tell me that it's not defined. So what you actually need to do if you want this post to be created at the start of the test running is to define a setup function. So I'm going to go ahead and define one. So I'm going to cut this code, and then what I have to do is to just come right here and say def, and in this case we're going to define our setup function or setup method. So this will take in self, and then right in here we can go ahead and basically go to create this specific post. So I'm just going to come right here and then paste the code that we've written. So since I have black, I can also go ahead and try to do things like formatting and all that interesting stuff. So now that we've been able to create our post, let's go ahead and save with Ctrl S. Then I'll pull up our terminal and try to run this test again. And now we see that our client object is not callable. So basically another mistake I did here was not to call the HTTP method. So I'm supposed to come and say self.client.get, and this will go ahead and basically call or make a request to that specific URL. So let's try to run again. Right now we see that we have a 404 status code being returned for this specific URL. Now that actually means that our URL does not exist anywhere on our server. So we have to write a view function to basically map onto this URL. So let's go to our views.py. So I'm going to head over to our views.py within our post. So we currently have the following view. We have the index view that's basically returning our list of posts. Now if we want to return our detail of post, then we have to actually define a view function for that. I'm going to come and say def, and this is going to be post detail, and actually it's going to be our post detail. Apologies for this. I'm going to close this terminal for now, and what we're going to have is going to be post detail. And when we call this a post detail, it's going to take in our request object, and it's also going to take in a unique identifier that will help us to get the specific post we want to access. So in this case, it's going to be our, so basically I'll provide the ID, and this is going to be the ID of the specific post we want to get. Now let us try to basically return the appropriate response or to render a template with this specific request. So we're going to just come and say return render, and in this case we shall render our request. So we're going to provide our request as the first argument right here, and then when we have this request, then we are also supposed to basically provide the HTML page or the template that we want to render within this request. So to do that, I'll just come and say that we want to render posts/detail.html. And once we've been able to do that, I'm going to go ahead and save. Now keep in mind that we haven't yet mapped this onto a URL. That's why when we try to run our tests again, it's actually going to tell us that it's not found anywhere on our URL yet. So what I'm going to do is to go right within our URLs for our posts app, and then I'm going to add another URL pattern or a path. So this is going to be path, and then I'll basically come here and then say that we're going to have this being /post/ then we shall provide the int ID, or provide an ID which is going to be the unique identifier for each of the posts, most probably the primary key of each of the posts. And once we have this, then we can also go ahead and try to basically make this an integer. So once we have this, then the next thing is to provide the views. So in this case, our view is going to be found within views, and then we shall access the post detail view. Once you have that, then you can also provide a name. So I'm going to provide a name that's just going to be a unique identifier for this specific view or basically URL pattern. So this is going to be name, and I'll just call this post detail. Now once we have this, I'm going to go ahead and save. Let's try to run this test again and try to see what's going to happen. So when I pull up my terminal right here and try to run our test with python manage.py test, in this case we see that still we are getting 404 not found status code, and this is basically something disturbing. So let's go ahead and try to check our tests. So when you go in our test right here, one thing we're going to see is we have our URL, which is going to be /post/self.id. So let's try to actually see what's wrong. So when you go to our URLs, we also have the same thing, which is /post/id, or the ID of that specific post we're going to create. Alright, so let us try to follow a more logical approach to handling this. There's something called absolute URLs or canonical URLs that are actually generated from an actual instance or an actual model object. So those are implemented by creating a method called a getAbsoluteURL on our model. So the getAbsoluteURL basically defines how we are going to return detail URLs for each post objects. Now let's go ahead and try to do that. So when you go in our models, so I'm going to head over to our models right here. I'm going to basically access our models. Sorry for this. So I'm going to go to our models, the PY in our posts app, and then the next thing we're going to do is to actually define. We're going to define that method. So I'm just going to come here and say def, and in this case I'll call this get absolute URL. So it's actually the Django, the generic extension that's helping me to auto-complete this. Now I'm going to basically fix the organization here, and we have this get absolute URL method. So just like you can see here, it uses the reverse function, but this is not actually what we want. So I'm going to import it once again by saying from Django.urls import reverse. And once you have that, then you can be able to use the reverse by providing the name that you provided for our specific URL, which is post detail. So I have to come right here and say that we're going to have our post detail. And once we have this, then we can also go ahead and change this from having the quags or keyword arguments being the primary key to the ID. So we can change this to our ID, and this will actually return our absolute URL for that post. Now within our test, what we can do is to go ahead and just say, instead of having this URL hard coded into our GET request, what we can actually do is to call the get absolute URL method on that specific post object that you're trying to get. I'm actually thinking that this failed to work because I actually just said self.id, which doesn't exist on our post. So if I wanted this to exist, then what we'll do is to actually access it by saying self.post.id and then go ahead and save. So when we save, this time I think that specific test is going to run. It's not going to return for us 404. It's actually still returning 404 for some reason. But let's try to change this. So if we want to change this, instead of hard coding it within our test, what I can do is to maybe just come here and say that instead of hard coding our URL, we're going to just actually access self.post. And in this case, we shall call the get absolute URL method. So in this case, I'm just going to come and say .get absolute URL. So when we say get absolute URL, of course, it's going to return a URL in the format of /post and then /int ID of the specific post that we have. So once I have that, then let's try to run our test again. So we expect that it's going to return the URL. Now let's try to run this. And now in this case, our test for the URL passed. So what we're actually getting as an error is that the template that we specified is not being rendered. So for us to be able to render this template, all we have to do is to come within our templates here, and within our posts folder, we're going to create a new file which we're going to call our detail.html. Now once we've been able to do that, in this case our template is going to be rendered, meaning that this error is going to be disappearing. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Now I'll pull up our terminal again and run our tests, and let's hope for the best this time. So we see that right now all our tests are passing, our template is being rendered correctly, and we are safe. So let's go ahead and try to return to test whether the content, the actual content of our detail page is being returned within this response. So to do that, what we have to do is to come right within our test.py, within our details page test right here. I'm just going to come and basically create a new method. So this is going to be def, and then we shall say test. So this is going to be test detail page. So in this case, I'm just going to say def test detail page returns, let's say, correct content or something like that. I'll just say returns correct content. So in this case, I'm going to say that's going to take in the self. And once we've done that, then all we need, we shall actually just need this response object. So once you have the response object, I'll just fix its indentation just like that. And once we have this, then all we're going to do is to check for if our title exists within our response. So to do that, I'll just come and say self.assert. In this case, I'll just come and say contains. And in this case, we're going to first provide our response. So I'm just going to come and say response, and our response is going to be equal to the response object that we've created here, and then the text, that the actual text that we want to check for. Now in this case, I'm just going to come and say we're going to check for self.post.title. That's for the title of that specific post. And in this case, we can actually, I'm going to check for a lot of things. So I'm going to say self.assert contains title, and then I can also come and say we're going to check for the body as well. So I'm just going to come and basically check for the body. Now in this case, we're going to say that this is going to basically contain the body. Now let's try to do the same thing for the date created. It's actually going to be self.post.body, And also I'm going to check for that. So in this case, I'm going to check for the date created or created at. I don't know what I call it. Let me just check it out. So in our models.py, we actually call that the created at date. So I'm just going to come within our tests and just going to simply call that our created at. So in this case, we're going to have our created at. So once we have that, let's try to run our test. So these tests are actually going to fail because none of this information is being returned within our response. So when you try to test, in this case we see that false is not equal to true, so that means that our test is failing for each of the things that we have asserted. So let's go ahead and try to make this pass. So we're going to go to our detail page, and that's our post slash detail.html, and then what we're going to do is to go ahead and basically write the code for each of the things that we need within this page. So I'm going to begin by basically creating a layout that each of these pages is going to follow. For now, what we've been doing is to just render each view with its own HTML, and we don't have a specific layout to guide us into how our application is actually going to be structured. So I'm going to create a simple layout. I'll just come to our templates folder right here, and I'll create a new file which I'll call base.html. And once you have this base.html file, I'm going to write the entire HTML file structure within here, including a header and a footer, and each of the featured and each of the basic components that you shall need to share across all templates. So I'm going to come right here, and then I'll basically create a simple tag or HTML. So this will generate some HTML content in here. So I'm going to rename this. So I'll just change this to our let's say TDD blog. And in case we have a title, and we shall have to provide the title in here. Let's see if it exists. So I'll just come and make this dynamic by saying title. So I'll also write an if statement here to basically check if it exists, and if it doesn't exist, so I'll say if. So the general extension is what is helping me to write this very fast. So if I say if title, then shall have our title, and if we don't have a title, we're going to just write else. So we try to write it in here by saying else, and this will write else. So basically, if we don't have a title, we shall just have a TDD blog, just like that. So once we've been able to do that, now the actual content of our website is going to exist within the body tag of our HTML file. So to do this, I'm going to begin by defining a header part. So this is going to be a simple header. And now let's just have URLs that link links to the various pages that we so far have. So in this case, I'll just come and say that we're going to have an anchor tag, and this is going to be our home page. So I'm going to say that's going to be our home page. And once we have this, then right now all we can do is to basically go ahead and provide our URL, because we have some URLs right now. Now, thanks to Django, all I have to type is URL and then state the name of that actual URL. Now, when you go back to our URLs right here, we call this the home page. So I'll just come and have to provide the name, which is going to be our home page. And once we have that, then the next thing we're going to do is to say that we're going to have another anchor tag, and this is going to be having a URL. So in this case, what we can do is to basically provide the the call to the get absolute URL method. So instead of coming here and saying URL and then you say, let's actually try to do it like that. So we can do something like post detail, and then we go ahead and provide the post ID. So in this case, once we have the ID being equal to something, we can just come and say ID. Sorry for this. Actually, we don't have to provide this because it has to be within our home page. So sorry for that. So what I'm going to do is to just leave the home page as the only page that we are going to navigate to for now. So once we have that, then let's try to put the content inside here. So in this case, I'll just come and say we're going to have a block tag, and this block tag will be called our content. So this is where the actual content of that page is going to be. And once you have that, then I'm going to also describe a certain footer. So I'll just come and say footer. So this is going to be our footer. Now within our footer, we're going to basically just write a simple copyright statement and the date, the actual year. So to do that, I'm just going to come here and say that we're going to have our copyright. So I'm just going to say and copy, and then basically providing our TDD blog. And once you have this, then I can actually write some script tags to just help us have a automatically added there. So I'm going to be using JavaScript to do this. So I'll just say close the script. So let me just actually write it like this. So once we have that, then all we can do is to basically create a new date object. And once we have that, then we can actually call get folder, which is going to return for us the folder that we are currently in. So when I save, now we already have a layout, a simple layout that we can follow for now that's shared across all the pages that we currently have. So to go to our index.html page, we'll have to get rid of all the HTML content that we have and then place the content within our layout. So I'm going to get rid of the body right here. And then what I have to do is to say extends, and then in this case it's going to be extending the base template that we've defined over here. So I'll just come and say extends base.html, and right after doing that, then within our tags, I'm also going to remove these closing tags and then also get rid of this content. So I'm going to cut this content right here and then place it within our content. So I'm just going to come here and say block, and then this is going to be content. And once you have this, then the next thing is actually going to be to place this within our layout. So when I save, hoping that our server is still running, so we haven't actually been able to do this, but we're going to do is to run our test later, but our server is still running, no errors. So when you go back to our page, in this case when you refresh, we shall now see that our home link is going to be here. And now we also need to provide a link that's going to redirect us to our post details. So to do that, I'm just going to come and go within our index.html. So where we actually provided the anchor tag for each of the posts that we have, we're instead going to come and call our get URL, our get absolute URL method. So I'm just going to come here, and all I will have to do is to say post dot, in this case I'll say get absolute URL. So this will actually return the URL to that specific post. Now when I save, in this case when you go back right here and try to refresh, when we click on each of our posts, so when I click on these posts, it will actually take us to an empty detail page specific to that specific post. So this is good for now. So let's try to modify our detail page so that it actually returns some content so that we can pass our tests. So to do that, I'm going to head over to our detail page that we defined over here. And the first thing we shall have to do is to extend our template or extend our layout. So to do that, I'll just come and say extends. And in this case, what I have to do is to say extends. In this case, I'll say base.html. And once I have this, then I'll just come and say block, and then shall have to provide a block content. So this is where the actual content is going to be. Now let us start by creating an h1. So this h1 is going to be basically having the title of that specific post. Now I'm just going to come and say that shall have self. This case is going to be self dot. In this case, it's not self, it's actually going to be the post, but we haven't yet rendered this. So when you go ahead and refresh, of course you don't have any post that we've basically rendered for this. So we have template syntax error, basically showing us that we haven't provided anything. So let's say we say post, and in this case we shall say post title. So when we save, of course we haven't yet defined a post that has a title for this specific post that you are trying to access the detail for, but you see that our page inherits our layout. So basically after doing that, then let's go ahead and try to bring this post into our template. So to do that, we shall go within our views and then try to query for that post and then add it to our context. So I'm going to come here, and all I have to do is to say post is going to be equal to, so in this case we're going to say post dot objects dot get, and then we shall have to get our ID, which is going to be equal to our ID. Now we shall need to provide a context. So this context will basically have let's actually just call it context and then create it outside here. So I'll just come and say context, and then I'll go ahead and create this variable called a context, which is going to be a dictionary of whatever variables we shall use in our template. So I'm just going to come and say context, and this is going to be equal to a dictionary. So we shall have our post, which will be equal to our post. So in this case we shall say our post, and then let's also have a title. So I'm just going to come and provide our title. So it's going to be our title, and our title in this case is going to be post dot title. So once we have this, when I go ahead and save, hoping that our server is still running, don't have any issues. So when you go back to our template, when you refresh, you now see that our title has been shown, and it's also actually showing up within our title. So let's go ahead and try to return the detail of this specific page. So to do that, I'll just come right here, and then within our base or our detail.html, in this case I'll just come and say that we're going to have paragraph, and then we shall have our, so this is going to be our post dot, so this will be our body, and when we save, we are going to go back here, and when we refresh, we now see that our body has been returned. Now let us go ahead and also try to return the date created. So to do that, I'll just come right here and basically say small, or let's say we're going to return a small paragraph, or let's say small, and then we shall also make this bold. So just dealing with HTML here. So I'm just going to come and say we're going to return the date created. So in this case we're going to say let's say published on. So in this case we're just going to come here, and all I have to do is to basically change this to basically show the date on which we published this. So I'll just come here and say post dot created at, and this is going to return the date when this post was actually created. So once we have that, we shall go back here, and when I refresh, we now see that it's actually showing the actual date when we basically posted this post. So let's go back to our home page, and when you try to access the other posts, it's actually returning the detail. So let us now try to run our tests and see if they actually pass. So to do that, I'll just come within our VS Code, within the terminal where I render tests. I'll just come and clear the terminal and then run our python manual.py test. And in this case, we see false is not true. Now this is actually returning this because we are not seeing the datetime object as we have it in our database. This is actually sort of a string representation. So right now I think everything is running except for that specific detail page. So please leave a comment down in the description on how we can basically get rid of that error. But for now, our detail page has been built and we've written tests to write it. Now next on, we're going to go ahead and associate these posts to users so that they can be able to author these posts.